Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flack.
Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That is Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. I am your host, Sandra Flack. Welcome to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. I am grateful that you are joining me today. It is my honor to offer you encouragement and community for your parenting journey. You know, raising kids with trauma is difficult, to say the least. And if they were prenatally exposed to alcohol or other drugs, we know that that is next level difficult, right? And I'm on this journey with you as a fellow adoptive mom. So you're not alone. And there is a whole community of fellow parents and caregivers also on this journey, and we like to support one another. So I hope you will check out this vital resource.
Sandra Flack, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
While this podcast isn't FASD specific, there are some fabulous podcasts out there that just focus on that. I'm a dedicated listener to those podcasts, but I do talk about FASD a lot, and that's not only because of my personal experience, but the prevalence of FASD among children in adoptive and foster and even kinship placements it's huge. Most of these kiddos are not diagnosed or they're misdiagnosed. Most of us parents and professionals don't even, realize that FASD is the leading cause of developmental and learning disabilities worldwide. And, and not just in our, corner of the world, but 1 in 20 school-age children in the United States, right? That just the average population of school-age children in the US has been prenatally exposed. And that's more prevalent than autism, which is 1 in 36 kids. But of course, us as adoptive and foster parents, our kids who come in with trauma histories and, oftentimes, there may have been drug addiction, alcoholism, a whole host of things. And it's highly likely that the children that we're caring for have been prenatally exposed, which impacts their brain and impacts ultimately their behavior, right? So as a mom of 2 young adults, one is just turning 21 this month. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around that. And one is 18. And he'll be 19 in a few months. They were both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were 6 and 8. And I spent years trying to figure out what was going on, right? We became trauma informed. We used all of the connected parenting strategies. I devoured my copy of The Connected Child by Dr. Karen Purvis. And all of that worked. And I still use those TBRI principles today. Don't throw them out. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But we did reach a point where we're like, well, we've got connection, we've got attachment, but there's something else going on here. And then once they reach the teen years and you add, those lovely hormones to the mix, it's, the train can go off the tracks real easily. And then you're like scratching your head or pulling your hair out and, what's going on? Like, what is going on? And that's where we were. That's where I was. And then had to take my deep dive into FASD, because even though my kids had a diagnosis, that really doesn't always lead to anything support wise or resource wise, unless you fight for it and dig for it, because our kids got the diagnosis and we were handed a pamphlet on ADHD and told, have a nice day. So not helpful. So now I offer very intentionally FASD resources because I know how hard this journey can be. And I want those parents, I want you all out there to have what I didn't have in those early years of parenting my kids. We need community, we need support, and it needs to, really be FASD specific and FASD, aware, right? So I offer not just the support group that you heard about in our little commercial there, but also online and in-person FASD workshops and training. I travel, I speak, I write, and I also offer online parent coaching. So you can find all of that out on our website. I do have a couple of trainings coming up that I want to tell you about. Right around the corner on Wednesday, August 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I am offering a free intro FASD online workshop. And that'll, cover the bases. It's great for parents, for caregivers, for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about this, but also for anybody in your kiddo's life who maybe needs to have an understanding of FASD. Grandparents, adult siblings, Sunday school teacher, youth group leader, school teacher, babysitter, anyone really in your kiddo's life. And it's free. It's an hour. It's live. I do it live through Zoom, and they can ask questions. And that's super helpful and a very popular resource that I offer once a month. So if you can't pick it up in August, because it is, a lot of people are on vacation. If you look at the background, I'm recording this remotely up at our camp in the Adirondacks, but wherever I go, I'm able to be able to host a training. So those are offered once a month. And then coming up on Thursday, August 22nd at 10 a.m. Eastern, and I think I announced this in our previous podcast incorrectly. So the one on August 22nd is 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It is a 3-hour FASD workshop. And both of these workshops will unpack the impacts of alcohol on the developing brain in utero, the symptoms of FASD, and really start to look at some brain-based parenting strategies that you can use to help your kiddos. And I incorporate the facets neurobehavioral model, which I am trained in all of those workshops. So now, if you really want to go to school on this and you really want to take it even deeper, my most in-depth workshop, I'm going to be offering that coming up in October. And that is, it covers, it's 18 hours worth of content. It is 6 3-hour sessions. We meet once a week for those 6 sessions. And we really unpack the facets neurobehavioral model, really go deep in all of this. So to register for any of these FASD workshops, the coaching, to sign up for the support group, any of it, you would go to our website, justicefororphansny.org, and you can click on the training tab, which will take you to our FASD, or you can click on the registration tab, which will take you to whatever workshops are currently being offered. Either way, you'll get there. And then we also have a link in the show notes for this episode so that it's easy for you to find it. So also, I've been writing a whole blog series on the symptoms, the primary symptoms of FASD. I dedicate one post to each episode. And that is on my personal blog, my personal website, sandraflack.com. So you can check that out. I hope that you will. And let's see, of course, please subscribe and follow, leave a review of this podcast, share it with your favorite podcast, or share it with your favorite adoptive and foster parents so that they can find this podcast. We are on YouTube as well. If you want to see the video version, you can see me like brushing this fly away that's sort of bothering me, flying around my head here. If you want to watch the podcast, or you can just listen on your favorite platform. But either way, if you follow it, subscribe it, download it, all of those good things, it truly does help your favorite podcasts to be more, that's not good English, but easier found, more easily found by those who are searching for podcasts about adoption and foster care and all of the things. So share it so others can find out. Anyway, now let's get to our guest today. I do have a guest today. I'm super excited to bring you my conversation with Andrea Bowling. She is a U.S. Army veteran and licensed clinical mental health counselor with 20 years of experience in human services. She primarily works with children and families involved in the child welfare system, and she is the author of the new children's book, From Foster to Forever. Andrea lives in southern Indiana with her husband and 3 dogs and a cat. Please welcome to the show, Andrea Bowling. Well, welcome to the show, Andrea.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here, Sandra.
I'm excited to have you. I love your children's book, and we're going to talk about that. But I always like to sort of start at the beginning. And first of all, I know that you are an Army veteran, so thank you for your service.
Thank you for saying that.
And so what came first? Because you've worked in child welfare. So what came first, the Army or your work in child welfare?
Sure, yeah. So I was in the military right after college. So I spent quite a bit of time, and I was primarily at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, which is unfortunately now closed, unfortunately for those of us who served there. So it exposed me to the medical field because Walter Reed being a hospital, and I quickly gravitated towards mental health in terms of my interest in work assignments there. And when I got out of the Army, I actually just went to work, any human services agency I could find. My very first job was an overnight job at a domestic violence shelter for women and children. And I moved. Then after that, I worked as the assistant director at a home called Haven House in New Mexico, which actually it's an interesting model, or it was at that time in the early aughts. Instead of having actual foster parents at the ready for children who were, removed suddenly from their home, they had a nonprofit that would house them and provide services until a foster family was found. And that exposed me to the child welfare space, shall I say. I since then went on to work with adults with developmental disabilities. I came to becoming a licensed mental health counselor late in my life. It was sort of a midlife, decision. I wanted to make more of a difference. I had been in administrative roles and done case management and been exposed to people in our society who unfortunately have not been as fortunate, at least as I have been. And, really began to think this is what I want to do with my life. But I wanted to get a license so that I felt like I could make a more intimate difference. And once I was licensed as a mental health counselor, which I did during the pandemic, so that was interesting timing. That was the end. I actually got my license and my master's in 2020. And so went on to work. My very first job, I live in southern Indiana, which is an area with, unfortunately, a lot of societal challenges. There is, the opioid crisis is still huge here. Methamphetamine is very well known, unfortunately. The amount of just the sheer number of parents who are unfortunately putting their children in danger is large. So in Indiana, the Department of Child Services contracts with what we call home-based agencies to provide services to these families who are, experiencing an open case with DCS. And, for a newly licensed therapist, even someone who was, 50 plus and had years of experience, I was blown away, honestly, by, the need. And, there were times where I was assigned to work with the parents. And there was a lot of time I was assigned to work with the children. And, I have two children, very blessed to have two wonderful children. My husband has a child from his first marriage, so we've got a wonderful blended family. And, this wasn't something that I had experienced in my personal life. But I couldn't believe I was living next door to people, not specifically, but, metaphorically, to my next door neighbors. Like, don't say that. I live in a community that is experiencing all these challenges. So, I just very quickly began to be drawn to the children who were absolutely innocent victims of this whole mess. And I noticed a bunch of things. I work with a group of, or did work and still do in my current role, with a group of wonderful volunteers from CASA organizations. I work in a 5-county area right now, and I'm often, involved in a case with Department of Child Services in any of those counties. So I've just, Southern Indiana has done an incredible job at, providing volunteers. And, anyway, I began to, get really involved in all these cases. And of course, also was exposed to just a tremendous amount of dedicated and incredibly unselfish foster parents. Mm-hmm. And I began to realize that the thing that I sort of saw as kind of the unifying thread in every case I worked with was that nobody, even CASAs who, and their job is specifically to represent the needs of the child, and then there was a therapist and then a couple, case management, parent assistants, the visit supervisor, the DCS family case manager. There's all these people. And I wondered, is anybody actually sitting down with this 7-year-old and saying to them, okay, so this is exactly what's going to happen for the next year of your life. These are the people, this is why these people are here. This is why you're not with your biological parents anymore, appropriately in terms of mm-hmm. development, of course. But nobody, I felt like, was ever saying to these kids, this is what's going to happen to you. This is sort of why you're here, and you're not alone. Other children have gone through this. Nobody really maybe knows how this is going to end up, because we would tell you if we did. But, and I felt like I looked for a book, basically. I said, okay, well, there's got to be a book I can, because I love books. I'm a lifelong library attender. When my daughter was born, like literally her first outing when she was 10 days old was to the library with me. Mm-hmm. And, so I thought, okay, there's a book. There has to be a book. But as far as I know, there isn't a book. So I wrote this book to be a tool for therapists, for anyone who has a foster child in their life, to help not normalize, because this experience is never normal, of being, obviously removed from your parents' home and being subjected to all this horrible emotional stuff, especially for kids who are probably already challenged when it comes to that kind of thing because of the trauma and because of even things like fetal alcohol exposure. So I thought a book as to be kind of the like the lowest common denominator. Everyone can relate to a book. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I had to write that book. So that's what I did.
So I love that. I love your story, your journey, just naturally progress in just really following your heart and your passion to support children and families and be there to help. And the book, because we didn't give the title, I briefly gave the title at the beginning, but I love it. And I'll hold it up for those of us.
I have one too.
You've got one too. For our listeners who are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the cover, but it's called From Foster to Forever, Jack's Journey Home. And I'm so excited that you wrote it because you recognized that there needs to be a conversation in a child appropriate way to really help these children as they transition to this, like their whole world is changing. So to all of us tend to want to sit down with a book and read children books, right? So,
Yes.
what a great way to gently and lovingly approach these things. And the book is adorable. I love the illustrations, which realistically depicts the diversity of foster and adopted families. I'm sure that was intentional. It's also intentional the way you gently include not only this boy, Jack, who, comes into the foster care system, but you introduce the foster family and the therapist, and there's a policeman in there, parent visits, reunification. One of the little kids in the book gets reunified, or is about to be, and then Jack in the end actually gets adopted. So I love how you incorporated all of that in there. So Andrea, what is your goal for the book? What do you want it to do?
I want this book to help children who are in foster care, whether that's kinship care, whether that's a foster care placement that's going to lead to adoption. I want these children to have a better age-appropriate sense of A, what's going on, and B, it's not their fault. And C, to realize that in addition to the fact that, because I don't want to make a D, because that's too many, I want kids to understand that they're not the only child, that no one has just picked them out for this because they were bad. But also, emotional safety for me and my work, whether I'm working with adults, whether I'm working with children, even in my personal life, emotional safety is a huge issue. And I feel like one of my goals with the book, especially with, the exchanges between Elaine and Jack, is my goal was to try to tell kids, it's okay to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a child, undergoing this trial. And, even as a foster parent, there are some times where there just are no words, or there are very few words to comfort a 6-year-old who has, experienced unspeakable trauma and is now just trying to get through every day. And here it is, now they're going to kindergarten, and oh my God, this kid is, barely able to feel safe anywhere. And, so foster parents and the whole system, everyone who supports these children, I can speak only from Southern Indiana, but I feel like it's probably common everywhere. The system is overwhelmed with the needs of these children, and CASAs do an amazing job. And I would, if I had more time, I would be a CASA volunteer. But I support everything they do. But yet, they have a role that is fairly well defined. And, some of them who might have a background more in human services, sometimes can provide those needs otherwise. But a lot of times, something like a book that can bridge that gap between an adult maybe not having the words and a child not having the receptive ability to understand what they're saying. Even things like, for example, when Vivian is experiencing her food insecurity issues, that's a big part of, children who have been in homes where they have been neglected or abused. So I wanted to put that in there again to be, okay, this little girl has experienced this too. So if I'm experiencing it and she's experienced it and gotten through it, so can I.
I love that, because you do address even that. I should have listed that off, the food insecurity part of it. A lot of our parents and myself included can identify with those things, and the big feelings, right? The big feelings, you address that a lot. The child in the book, Jack, has a lot of different feelings, and it can be scary. There's so much unknown, and they've come in with trauma, they've come in with loss, and there's just so much going on. And I know for we didn't adopt our children through the foster care system, but a couple of had a kinship placement, but then also adopted internationally. And our youngest, who came to us at 5, spent those first 5 years in an orphanage overseas. So there was loss, there was trauma, there was prenatal exposure to alcohol. And then you pluck this kid up out of, another country, and 3 airplanes later, here we are in the United States. And, he doesn't know who we are, or that we're safe, or that this is going to be better than living in an orphanage. So there was a lot of, he was living in survival mode, especially in those early,
Absolutely.
weeks and months and years even. And, I in my book, I've written a book too about our story, but I remember, saying, gosh, I can take the kid out of the orphanage, but I can't take the orphanage out of the kid, because there's those survival skills, living out of that, very primitive part of the brain. And it was just so hard. So, for him and for us as his caregivers, and building trust, right? And I love the fact that your book, kind of defines some of those things, in a child appropriate way, and makes him seem, this, like you said, you're not the only one. There's other children who are going through this, and there are safe adults, because you have those all throughout the book, who are here to help and support you. So I love that you've done that, throughout the book. So where can our listeners find a copy of From Foster to Forever?
They can find it on Amazon. And the easiest thing to do is either just Google the name, or Google my name, Andrea Bowling, just like the game, or also on barnesandnoble.com. So, it's a paperback, and I wanted to make it as accessible in terms of the purchase price. And, so far, I've been very humbled by the response to the book. And, again, I didn't write this book necessarily to become a New York Times bestseller, but I love I'm so grateful, and I do love the fact that people have responded positively to it, because it was very much a labor of love.
Yeah.
And and in terms of also just the some of those big emotions too, I really wanted to point out too that in my opinion, an emotion in and of itself is ambivalence. And, these kids may be feeling so many emotions that they don't even know, honestly, which end is up. And, I have to shamelessly plug myself and my dog here. So the CASA in the story was sort of patterned after my best friend, who does work for a CASA organization. And then I am supposed to be Elaine, because when I have my hair down, I look more like Elaine. And then my dog is Baxter, who is not a therapy dog, but he's in training. But, when Elaine says, it's okay to just not even be sure what you feel. And, for example, like when I remember doing supervised visits with kiddos when their parents didn't show up. And, how do you actually, what do you say to a child when that happens? You just have to provide a safe space. So I guess that would be my, if I had to put it in 2 words, this book, I want it to be a safe space.
Yeah, I love that. And I believe it's a book that every foster and adoptive parent should have, on their shelves at home, especially if you're actively fostering and you're having placements on a regular basis. It's definitely a resource, that you can use when you have a new placement. And I think any age, really, even older kids can get something out of this book, because it's a children's book, right? It's not threatening. It is a safe space. And then even, all of the child welfare workers, CPS workers, having some of these books in, we know a lot of times kiddos are spending some time at the DSS office until a placement, an open foster family is found. So every office, should have some of these, so that while the children are sitting there, it could be something that they're looking at. So I highly recommend it. It is From Foster to Forever, Jack's Journey Home. Love it. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I highly recommend that you get a copy. And thank you so much for writing this book, Andrea, because I believe it's such an important resource to have for children.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It was just really lovely to, hear about your interest in the book, and just a joy to speak with you this morning.
Well, thank you. And most of our listeners, I had shared with you this earlier, are, foster parents, adoptive parents, kinship caregivers. We're parenting kids like Jack in the story, kids with adverse childhood experiences, trauma, prenatal exposure, all of that. So, as I'm sure you understand, we're on this challenging parenting journey, raising kids who've come from trauma backgrounds, who have those big feelings, who have fear of the unknown, and are just navigating all those difficult things. So would you offer some advice for our parents who are listening, some words of encouragement?
Yeah, I would love to. And I have been thinking about that since, during our talk. And I think that the best thing that I would have to say, unfortunately, not having had the experience of being a foster parent myself, but use the communities that you have formed, reach out to each other. One of the things that I love about working with children who are involved in this situation is there is a team, and there's always someone else to bounce your frustration off of or ask a question. Use that therapist if you have access to a therapist, because those people should know the answers, or at least be able to give you a considered list of suggestions if you're having a specific challenge. Some of my most inspired interventions with children came from literally parents texting me on a Sunday going, "This has happened. I don't know what to do. Help." And I've been able to say, okay, well, let's just think about this. And I could make a suggestion, and it sometimes helped, not always. But so reach out. Don't think that you're alone, because I don't think anyone who works in child welfare wants to think that, people who are foster parents and are doing this as an avocation are alone.
Yeah, because it can be a very isolating journey, because, we may have friends who aren't fostering or who haven't adopted, and they don't understand the behaviors of our kids. They don't understand the trauma history that they came from, which, is really driving those behaviors. So we can become very isolated. And, we can't seek parenting advice from folks who, are parenting biological children, because that, it doesn't apply. So it's such a struggle to be understood. But I agree, we have to find our community, and it would be people who are in this on the same journey, whether it's the therapist, your case, the children's caseworker, folks, the CASA worker, people who are in this journey, other fellow adoptive and foster parents, because we understand each other. We've been there. We can, we can listen, and then we can share some, more appropriate advice if necessary. But just to feel like we're not alone, is a huge help. Support groups, I always put a plug in for those. We have a support group, our FASD support group. So, definitely good advice. So, Andrea, thank you so much for all you're doing on behalf of children and families, and for writing this amazing book, Foster to Forever. I'm hoping it does well, and feel like it should be on every shelf of every foster home, especially. So again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
And thank you for joining us today for the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. I hope you were encouraged by my conversation with Andrea Bowling. We will put links in our show notes to where you can find her book. She is also on Instagram, and that is, her Instagram is author_Andrea Bowling. Of course, the book you can find again at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon, and we'll make sure that you have links to those in the show notes. Please share about not only her book, but this podcast with your fostering and adopting friends. We are here to encourage you and equip you for your parenting journey as a mom of 2 young adults with fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm also a facilitator of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. So I love to train and teach and speak, as you can tell, and write about this parenting journey of kids with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So providing those resources that I wish I had, a couple decades ago when I started this journey myself. So we want to provide those for you as well. The parent coaching, the workshops, the support group, my blog at sandraflack.com, all of the things. Make sure you check out our website as well, justicefororphansny.org. Links to everything in our show notes. Find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. We also have a YouTube channel at Justice for Orphans. And I, Sandra Flack, am on all of those. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me there as well. Grateful again that you spent your valuable time with us today. I'm thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.